In this video, we're going to have a look at the government's macroeconomic objectives and the policies that it has to meet those objectives. In reality, the government might have many objectives, so we're just going to focus on three: economic growth, low unemployment, and stable prices. Economic growth is an increase in the productive capacity of the economy, as shown by an increase in real GDP. Low unemployment is fairly self-explanatory, and stable prices means a controlled and low level of inflation. For example, the government in the UK has set the target of 2% per annum for inflation. The government has three policy tools that it can use to achieve these objectives. It has fiscal and monetary policy. These are designed to control the level of aggregate demand. And supply-side policies. These are designed to increase the level of aggregate supply in the economy. Monetary policy is the control of the money supply in order to control the level of aggregate demand in the economy. The lower the money supply, the lower the level of aggregate demand, and the higher the money supply, the higher the level of aggregate demand. The government can use interest rates, exchange rates, and quantitative easing to do this, but we're going to focus on interest rates. If the government increases the interest rates, people will be more willing to save and less willing to borrow. Therefore, consumption will fall. And also, firms will be less willing to borrow to invest, so investment will fall. Investment and consumption are both components of aggregate demand. So if the government wishes to reduce the level of aggregate demand, it will increase interest rates. It will do the opposite if it wants to increase the level of aggregate demand. It would cut interest rates, therefore more people would borrow and fewer people would save. Investment will rise and therefore the level of aggregate demand will rise. Moving on to fiscal policy, this is when the government uses its budget in order to increase or reduce the level of aggregate demand in the economy. A budget deficit is when the government's tax receipts are less than its spending, and a budget surplus is when its tax receipts are greater than its spending. If the government runs a deficit, it means that government spending will be high and taxation will be low, and this will increase the amount of aggregate demand in the economy. If the government runs a budget surplus, government spending will be low and taxation will be high, and this will reduce the level of aggregate demand in the economy. In this diagram here, we can see the effects of fiscal and monetary policies. If the government runs an expansionary fiscal or monetary policy, that will increase the level of aggregate demand, shown by an outward shift in the aggregate demand curve. That will cause real GDP and therefore employment to rise, but it will also be inflationary. A contractionary fiscal or monetary policy will shift the demand curve inwards, and that will cause prices to fall, but will be harmful to growth. It will reduce growth and is likely to lead to higher rates of unemployment. Supply-side policies are any policy that the government uses to increase the level of aggregate supply in the economy. So we're really thinking here about improving the quantity or quality, the productivity of the factors of production. So for example, if the government invests in infrastructure such as roads and railways and communications, then the aggregate supply in the economy will increase. Better education will improve the standards of labour, as will better healthcare. Better technology will improve capital. Also, the government could use incentives to get more people to work harder, to become more productive, and it could also follow policies of privatisation and deregulation in order to make the markets more efficient. This diagram shows a successful supply-side policy. The government has successfully increased the productive capacity of the economy, and this is shown by an outward shift of the long-run aggregate supply curve. As we can see from the diagram, real GDP has increased and therefore employment is likely to have risen, and it's non-inflationary, so prices in this diagram have actually fallen. So this has been good for both inflation and GDP and employment.